Spider-Man, one of the most iconic and beloved comic book characters of all time.
From comics to cartoons to video games and a successful movie trilogy in the 2000s, the webhead has done it all. But with reboots being a thing in the 2000s and the fact that Sony wanted to hold on to the movie rights, as to my understanding a studio has to make a movie every so often in order to be able to retain the rights and keep making movies, it was asked why reboot the series in 2012. The argument that the late Laura Ziskin put forward in the making of this is that the comic book had been rebooted multiple times over the 50 years of Spidey's existence in 2012. The reboot occurred when Sony and Sam Raimi couldn't come to an arrangement over what could be for a fourth Spider-Man, with him directing and Tobey Maguire returning as the titular character. Sam said very civilly that they should not pursue a fourth movie and didn't want to waste the studio's time and money, and that they should move ahead with a reboot, of which Amy Pascal thanked him for his honesty.
Class act by Raimi.
So, in the same year that we got the curtain rising on the first Avengers team-up and the curtain coming down on the Dark Knight trilogy, Sony gave us the first Spider-Man reboot with the British-American actor Andrew Garfield replacing Tobey Maguire as the titular character.
So, how does this hold up after 11 years? Well, let's put the mask back on as we revisit The Amazing Spider-Man.
For the most part, this is a good reintroduction to the origin of Spider-Man, but it does seem to repeat the first movie. Instead of stopping a thief from taking money at a wrestling promotion, Parker fails to stop a shoplifter.
Folks, let's be real, in both these instances, Ben Parker's death could have been prevented by him.
The wrestling aesthetic is in the movie, but it's more of a quick reference. When he crashes through the roof of a wrestling arena and Parker sees a wrestling mask that represents Spidey's iconic mask but with a mouthpiece, he incorporates this into the art of what he's doodling in class. What I think this movie did better is allow Spider-Man to be more like Spider-Man in terms of humor, as one of the biggest detractions of the Sam Raimi trilogy is that Spider-Man didn't crack enough jokes, which is a huge part of his persona.
So, it's basically Deadpool, but without the guns and murder.
The car thief scene and the second encounter with the lizard are really good examples of how Spidey's humor can be used.
Is that a knife? Is that a real knife?
Yes, it's a real knife.
My weakness, it's small knives.
Just let me go.
Uh-oh. Somebody's been a bad lizard.
The message of, with great power comes great responsibility, is used again, but it's worded differently enough to where it doesn't feel like it's repeated for the sake of. I do like the fact that this version of Peter is very complex and he's dealing with a lot of issues. Not knowing what happened to his parents, what they were working on, and then dealing with the fact that he now has superhuman capabilities courtesy of the genetically altered spider that bit him, and adapting to how to use his abilities when necessary, as they do the clumsy aesthetics of when Wolverine was using his adamantium claws for the first time from 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. One aspect that was praised was bringing in the mechanical web shooters from the comics. Whereas the Raimi trilogy had Spidey with organic web shooters that he has courtesy of glands in his wrists, these devices were brought in as this shows how intelligent and innovative Parker was to be able to build these with whatever he could find. As he uses old watch pieces in his basement along with the web cartridges that he had bought from Oscorp, which I'm going to be honest, I'm surprised that no one at Oscorp would have put two and two together realizing that Parker was buying these in bulk. Also, where would he have found the time and money to buy these considering he wasn't working as a photographer at this point, and only working with what allowance that Aunt May would have given him? The best parts of the movie are whenever Spidey is in action and to the interactions between Peter and Gwen, as the writing allows Andrew and Emma to really make a romance work between the characters. And I like that they didn't copy the Peter and Mary Jane upside down kiss from Spider-Man 1.
As iconic as that scene was, it wouldn't look right being used again in this movie.
Just as engaging, for different reasons, is the journey of discovery Peter goes in wanting to learn the truth about what happened to his parents. The simple discovery of his father's briefcase and researching the science of cross-species genetics that they were working on as a means of wanting to heal people like Kurt Connors and regrow his arm. It is implied that there is a student mentor father-like son angle between them, but it feels hollow, compared to what Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe did with the first movie that felt genuine. With this, there's not much to it other than the success that they have in perfecting the decay algorithm which Connors had trouble in resolving after the disappearance of Richard Parker. One question that has been asked over the last decade is, why did Peter abandon his search to find his uncle's killer?
I think you could just make the argument of that he weighed up what was more important. Priorities.
Of course, anyone would want an assailant that took a loved one of theirs to answer for it, but in the context of what was also happening in the movie to the lizard wreaking havoc, I think that takes precedence over his uncle's assailant.
Is it a perfect movie? By all means, no. But it washed the taste of Spider-Man 3 out.
Long story short, the movie has inconsistencies that could have been resolved, but nonetheless, it's an enjoyable reintroduction to the character. This to me is the real Spider-Man. While his predecessor in Tobey Maguire had the shy awkwardness of Peter Parker down to a fine art, with Garfield, he was Spider-Man personified as he did what Maguire didn't. Crack jokes. That has always been a key integral part of Spider-Man's persona. Throughout many forms of media and continuity, he's the jokester. He uses his humor and wit to mask what he's truly feeling, just like wearing a physical mask to hide his identity to protect his loved ones. The car thief scene perfectly demonstrates this, where he confronts the car thief having snuck into the car prior and proceeds to troll him. Equally, one of the most touching and emotional moments is where he's able to show the emotion of the character by just his head movements with the mask on observing the boy he saved from the bridge in a tearful reunion with his father. Not to take anything away from Bryce Dallas Howard from 2007's Spider-Man 3, but she was basically a background character for all intents and purposes. Here, Gwen is front and center and Emma is such a breath of fresh air. Garfield describes her like a shot of mochaccino. She has such a warm presence that makes Gwen come across as strong, confident, intelligent, and also a sweetheart with a heart of gold. If the late Cliff Robertson was the more nurturing and compassionate version of Uncle Ben, then Martin Sheen definitely has a more assertive and aggressive side. He cuts to the chase with Peter and tells it like it is. Sally signed on as only the second big screen live-action version of May Parker as a favor to her late friend Laura Ziskin, who had helped produce the last 3 Spider-Man movies before this, and this was one of her last few movies before passing away from cancer in 2011. The Amazing Spider-Man was dedicated to her memory. Sally's version of May, like Martin's version of Ben, is more confrontational than Rosemary Harris's portrayal, to where she demands answers from Peter as he gives no clue as to where he's been, and is so secretive about what he does. There's not really a lot to say in this movie about Scott's performance, as he's only essentially there for a coffee break, and the only understanding we have about his presence is that someone stole his work and that he and his wife had to 86 out of the plot quick and leave Peter with his aunt and uncle. Reese replaces Dylan Baker as the amputee scientist researching to make himself whole again through the science of cross-genetics, being able to insert a lizard's capability of being able to regrow parts of their body. You see the desire and desperation very well with Ifan's performance, but I felt like the implied student mentor angle between him and Peter was flatter than Justice League's payoff. Anyone who's ever seen Dennis act or seen his stand-up comedy routine will know that this guy is very blunt and direct with his delivery. Especially in his stand-up show, No Cure for Cancer. He pulls no punches. He feeds off of Emma well, and even more so with the animosity between him and Peter Parker when talking about Spider-Man. Only the second actor to play Flash on the big screen, and he actually looks closer to Flash's age in the story, unlike Joe Manganiello, who looked like he was pushing 30 in the original 2002 movie. Chris does the usual high school meathead tactics of picking on people and taking it personally whenever someone calls him Eugene, but he does ease up when the news breaks of Peter's uncle's death and to greeting him a little more civilly at the end of the movie. I did like the fact that the character got some development as opposed to the few high school jock coffee break scenes from Spider-Man 1, because he is the first to approach Parker and show empathy to allow him to get the frustration out of his system after the death of Uncle Ben, as he came from an abusive background with his father being an alcoholic, so he knows how it feels. Really pleased that the character got some growth, and Chris is the best Flash thus far on film. His presence is very small in this movie, which is a detriment considering the caliber of actor he was. Life of Pi and Jurassic World, to name but a few. He makes Rafa very unlikable with his condescending tone and his intentions to use Connor's formula to be tested out on the Veterans Hospital without knowing what the side effects could be.
The chroma key work had gotten way better for this movie compared to the original movie 10 years prior.
Even the scenes shot at night to a green screen background make you wonder if this was shot in a studio or out on location, as the lighting and contrast is so on point that you can't tell. And would you believe? The crane segments with Spidey swinging over the streets of New York are all computer generated. The CG render for the lizard holds up for the most part. I just felt in some segments of the Oscorp Tower fight scenes there are some inconsistencies where it borderlines between photoreal and cartoony. This scene I felt was really well done for the comedic effect with the Stan Lee cameo, which is oblivious to what's going on behind him as he listens to classical music. One thing that was highlighted was the comparison to Mirror's Edge, where the camera would view the movie from Parker's perspective, as if he was wearing a GoPro camera, which definitely added a uniqueness to the movie. Danny Elfman did a spectacular job on the Spider-Man score throughout the original trilogy. No denial. But with Mark Webb's take on Spidey, he wanted something different, and in 2012 he collaborated with the late James Horner. Famed for his scores from movies like The Land Before Time, Casper, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and arguably his most recognized piece, Titanic. Of which, when you watch the crane scene, there are elements of Titanic's score in this. The car thief scene shows how it can be fun to be Spider-Man. There are a few seconds where the score is intense, but then it leads to this pleasant piece that just shows how much fun Peter is having swinging along the streets. One of the most beautiful pieces that really captures the aspects of hope and emotion is the rescue of the little boy in the car and the reunion between the boy and his father, as the music allows the scene to heighten the emotion. Speaking of the crane scene, this is by far the best piece in the movie, as it shows the hope that Spider-Man represents and the challenge he has to overcome with his injury and the weight of the city resting on the shoulders of this extraordinary gifted kid. The same score is reprised in the ending scene, in which Spidey is going after the criminals who the police are chasing, and it's a great way to end the movie. Sadly, James Horner never got to follow up on this score, as he was replaced with Hans Zimmer with 2014's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and then he sadly got killed in an accident in 2015 when his helicopter crashed just after takeoff. The movie grossed a profit of $758 million against a budget of $200 to $230 million. Today, that profit would be worth $996.8 million after an 11-year inflation adjustment. The movie took in $262 million in North America and then $495.9 million in other countries worldwide. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times felt that the reboot provided better reasons for why Peter Parker adopts his superhero role, even if the origin story didn't need to be told once again. He also remarked that it was probably the second best of the 4 Spider-Man films after Spider-Man 2, explaining that Lizard was lackluster compared to that film's villain, Dr. Octopus, and had the dramatic range of Godzilla. This should be noted that The Amazing Spider-Man was the last comic book movie that he reviewed before he passed away in 2013. Ty Burr of the Boston Globe felt that the film lacked the original's pop grace and the pulpy joy, saying the film was dumbed down, tarted up, and almost shockingly uninspired. Burr evaluated it as the worst superhero film since Green Lantern.
Really?
Okay, hold up a minute. It wasn't that bad, dude. Come on now.
Jordan Mincer of The Hollywood Reporter felt that the film was satisfying, explaining that Webb directed with emotional and comedic touches and provided a darker depiction and a stronger romance than the original. Andrew Garfield was praised for his performance as the titular character. Bob Mendello of NPR said, "Here comes another spider dude, this Andrew Garfield guy, so he better be really something, right?" Well, as it happens, he is. Tom Charity of CNN found Garfield's combination of fresh-faced innocence, nervous agitation, and wry humor immediately appealing. A sequel followed in 2014's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which was panned by fans and critics. But said fans and critics did continue to praise Andrew and Emma's performances along with the most comic book accurate representation of the suit. The series was cancelled after the poor result and Andrew no-showing at a Sony meeting that saw Spider-Man rebooted again and incorporated into the MCU in Captain America 3: Civil War, portrayed this time by British actor Tom Holland. Andrew Garfield would reprise his role as his version of Spider-Man in 2021's Spider-Man: No Way Home, in which he unites with Tom Holland and his predecessor in Tobey Maguire, in which Andrew got to have the redemption story that Peter wanted after failing to save Gwen in Amazing 2. And the pop that he got from the audience was amazing.
The movie has been enjoyed since 2012 on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. I'm MJ Knight, and this was The Amazing Spider-Man.